Yo, Big D back with a UFC 285 edition. Before I bring in my UFC friend Billy, please subscribe, like, and share the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page where there's plenty of content out there and more coming. Also, check out the Big D podcast for all your audio listeners on Spotify and Apple. So back to discuss this week's UFC 285 from Las Vegas. ActionNetwork FantasyLabs must be Billy Ward, right? So Billy, we get Jon Jones back this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, there's one rule about Jon Jones, which is never assume you're going to see a Jon Jones fight until he's actually in the cage, because we've had so many, Friday cancellations and various weirdness with him. But yeah, if all things go according to plan, very exciting to see him after 3 years return to action, stepping up to heavyweight. He looks just as big as all the other heavyweights, so that shouldn't be an issue for him. But he's 35 now. He hasn't fought in 3 years. Have those skills broken down? It'll be a really interesting fight.
Well, usually talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of a fighter. With Jon Jones, I think we should talk about the good, the bad, and the unknown. Because when Jon Jones was in his prime in that 205 division, I'm not sure been a better light heavyweight. I mean, condition wise, he could take you to the ground. He could box with you. I mean, I don't remember a better all around light heavyweight, or maybe even MMA fighter than him.
Yeah, I'm glad you threw that caveat in there at the end, because at his peak, it's very hard to argue that anyone was better than Jon Jones. But he kind of, and the one argument that I would consider making is Anderson Silva, and they both kind of had that weird phase where they just didn't really seem that interested. They're kind of messing around. Fights got a little bit closer than they needed to be. And Jones has came out and said that, he wasn't motivated for those fights. He was kind of just on cruise control, but now he is. We don't know how true that is, right? Every fighter always says they're in the best shape of their life before every fight. But if that is true, that's a scary prospect for Ciryl Gane, because he just got taken down a bunch of times by Francis Ngannou. And Jon Jones is one of the best wrestlers ever in the heavier divisions, certainly. So, the line movement on this has been interesting. When they first announced this fight, Jones was about plus 150 as an underdog. That's since more or less flipped, where Jones, moderate favorite here. That's kind of hard for me to pull the trigger on from a betting standpoint. It's just past the point where I feel like there's too many unknowns about him. Will his skills transfer with all the extra weight? Has he lost a step due to all the time out? How much of his success was due to drugs that they're now testing for? Is it just the 3 years out is too much to overcome? That's a lot of questions. Underdog money, loved it. Not huge on it now. Of course, from a DFS standpoint, you got to play him at 8,400, man. Like, he's going to rack up some takedowns. I think if I'm Ciryl Gane's camp, I haven't spent the last however many months trying to defend takedowns. I spent the last however many months trying to figure out how to get back up. That's awesome from a DFS standpoint, because even if Jones doesn't win or Gane lands a lot of strikes, if he gets a takedown, Gane gets back up, he gets another one, those little trips, all that stuff, those points are going to add up fast. So excellent DFS fight, I think. Don't see a reason not to just play both of them in cash games. From a tournament standpoint, I definitely want both. I think Gane could probably put him out if he's able to land any shots on him. And there's just so many unknowns with Jon Jones, as you alluded to.
Well, the bad with Jon Jones, well, let's see. PD suspension. How many arrests? At least one, right? Multiple arrests, right?
Yeah, I think 2 or 3.
And a bunch of bunch out of the ring shenanigans that we don't need to really go into. But he seems to be, I mean, yeah, there's the fighter Jon Jones, and there's out of the ring making bad publicity Jon Jones.
Yeah, and obviously we're not worried about that, right? Like, from a gambling DFS speculation standpoint, if he gets to the cage, he gets to the cage. But you do have to wonder about motivation and how hard he's been training. By all accounts, it looks like, like he was in his prime. So that should be really interesting. But it's a new weight class. He's 35. He had 3 years off. None of those are easy things to overcome. So I think Jones is more likely than not to win this fight. Again, if you look at the DraftKings salaries, 8,400, that's a steal, even just based on line movement since they dropped the salary. Really strong DFS play, of course. but laying the kind of juice you'd have to on him from a betting standpoint, don't love. I tweeted it out when they first dropped the lines that Jones was a steal at plus 150, plus 160. Obviously, you can't get that anymore. Locking up your money for that length of time is a whole different question. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the fight. Can't wait to see how he does. I think it'll also be interesting to see if Jones is able to win. Does he stay active at heavyweight? Is he fighting 2-3 times a year for the first time in a long time? Or is he kind of just hanging around waiting for super fights? Because the worst thing that could happen, in my opinion, here is Jones wins the title, but he kind of just shelves it for a while and is only waiting for Stipe, or isn't willing to fight deserving contenders, and then we have another division that's kind of just sitting on the shelf.
Or maybe maybe the UFC somehow gets Francis Ngannou back.
It wouldn't shock me if Francis goes and takes a boxing fight or two, makes a ton of money, and then comes back for a Jon Jones super fight. Wouldn't shock me. I think the UFC would have to change how they do business in terms of trying to lock him up for an 8-fight deal or whatever. But that's a whole different story. I mean, we've got Curtis Blades versus Sergey Pavlovich on the books for a month or two from now. Winner of that probably should get the next heavyweight title fight, barring whatever Stipe is doing. But we'll see. That's far down the line. Let's just focus on 285 for now, because it's an awesome night of fights.
Yeah, because you tell me we get one of the goats of MMA, and then how about Valentina Shevchenko, the queen of the 125-pound division, right?
Yeah, arguably the best female fighter of all time. Her only losses in the UFC are when she stepped up to 135 to fight Amanda Nunes. Took her to a decision twice, which is no small feat against Nunes just to have a competitive fight, and has pretty thoroughly cleaned out the female 125-pound division. We saw in her last fight, I actually bet on Taila Santos. I thought Santos won that fight, but it's not, robbery by any stretch. It was a very close fight. She showed some holes, I think Santos showed there is a path to beating Shevchenko if you can kind of bully her against the cage, work takedowns, work grappling where she's a little bit weaker. With all that said, this is just a horrible matchup for I'm blanking on it, Alexa Grasso. She's not that kind of fighter. She lands less than half a takedown per 15 minutes in her UFC career. She's just a pure stand-up striker, not a ton of power, doesn't really put people away. That's about the worst style you could bring to a Valentina Shevchenko matchup. So I think Grasso will make this mildly competitive. Like, she's not just going to get starched on the feet. There's just not really a clear path to victory for her. So from a DFS standpoint, if you can swing the salary, just play Shevchenko. Kind of tough, but she should end up with a really good score. I think she'll look to grapple a little bit here, which really helps out the scoring. But there's a ton of 9,000 plus fighters with awesome lines and odds and, going to be projected really highly. So it's a little bit of a trickier one for cash games.
I mean, is there a chance you play Grasso at 6,800? Because if she somehow got a decision against Shevchenko, I mean, could Grasso put up, how many points would you need from that salary?
Obviously, that depends on the rest of your lineup construction. The challenge is if you play both heavyweight fighters, now you've guaranteed yourself 2 losses. So you really need decent scores out of both your losers at that point. You might want, 30 or 40 points. She's a super high volume striker. So if she goes 25 minutes, she lost a 15-minute decision to Carla Esparza. I'm trying to see how many points she put up in that one. She lost a 15-minute decision to Carla Esparza and scored
35 points.
Yeah. So, you give her 2 extra rounds. Could she get to 45 or 50 in a loss? Probably. Valentina Shevchenko is a little bit harder to hit than Carla Esparza, to put it mildly. So, but 35 points is a reasonable, line if she's able to make it 25 minutes. That's a big ask to say that she can make it 25 minutes. The other thing you have to weigh, is there anyone else in that cheaper range, even within a few hundred, that you'd prefer? Song Kanan against Ian Gary, Jeff Neal. You're probably not playing Jamie Pickett against Bo Nickal. So there's an opportunity cost thing, whether you can try to make a more balanced lineup with some closer underdogs you think have a chance versus just, hey, I'm going to take the L on Grasso, open up a lot of salary, play some heavy favorites elsewhere.
I mean, be honest, from a betting standpoint, I'm not sure I touch this fight, because Shevchenko's got juicy odds, and I really don't think Ross is going to threaten her much. She might. I don't question her condition, but I don't think Ross will really threaten the champ.
No, I agree. And honestly, like from a betting standpoint, what I really want to happen is Shevchenko to just start her on the feet. And then we get like plus 500 on Aaron Blanchfield against Shevchenko in the next fight, because Blanchfield is a nightmare matchup for Shevchenko. She's big. She's a great grappler. She's going to bully her against the fence. All those things that Tyler Santos did, Blanchfield is also really good at. And Blanchfield has seen the game plan. She's basically a decade younger than Shevchenko. That's a whole different story again. I'm getting ahead of myself with thinking about the future here. But that's the matchup that I want to fade Shevchenko in, not this one against a similarly aged pure striker who doesn't have a lot of pop. Just none of that is how you beat Shevchenko, if there is a way to beat Shevchenko.
All right, before we talk about the rest of the card, I do want to discuss what do you think should happen if the UFC sees like a cancel main event? Because I think we've seen a couple times recently, but there've been two canceled main events, including this past weekend where both light heavyweight fighters didn't fight because one of them was ill before the fight. So what do you think the UFC could do if there's a postponed or canceled fight on after the card starts?
What do you think the UFC should do, or what do I think DraftKings should do in terms of
Both.
fantasy contests? Well, for the UFC, honestly, my answer is going to be pretty similar for both. The UFC can't do much. These are human beings. Like, stuff happens. What was supposed to be my last amateur fight, I tried to cut down to 155. For those who don't know my backstory, which I'd imagine is everyone, I primarily fought 170. I walked around 185 pounds, kind of a little welterweight, but too big to make 55. Tried to do it. My body just shut down when I had food and water again. I drove to the venue, was getting taped up and all that, couldn't stop throwing up. These things happen. Like, these are human beings. Stuff's going to happen. They happen in other sports too, but in team sports, if the backup left guard is thrown up before the game, it's not like they have to cancel the game. They just keep playing football. So there's not a ton the UFC can do. I think a lot of it is a function of weight cuts and diets and stuff like that. Just even if the weight cut goes okay, introducing food to your body again after it hasn't had it for 24, 36, whatever hours, you're always kind of rolling the dice. And it's a bit of an art and a bit of a science to getting that right. Is there probably better ways to take care of fighters? Maybe. We've talked about all the ways that we can try to limit weight cutting. They all have their own problems. I don't think that's ever really going to work the way that promotions think it might. I don't think there's a ton you can do. It sucks when it's a main event. Had that been the first fight on the card between two guys we'd never heard of, no one would have remembered it or thought anything of it. So that's a tough one. As far as DraftKings, we saw how late swap worked, which was not great. I think it's going to happen and it's going to suck, and somebody else is going to win that night, right? Like, if you go 100% main event fighters, tough break. Over a long enough time span, if you're building lineups correctly and factoring in the risk and the ownership on those guys, sometimes it's going to benefit you too. Like, I had some really good lineups last week that probably would have won significant money had Spann won at the very least. Maybe not if both guys fought. But I've also had weeks where I faded a fight that got canceled and I made more money than I would have otherwise because all the people that played those guys took the hit. So there's a reason we look at ownership. There's a reason we think about not playing super popular guys, especially in tournaments. And that's one of them, right? Because if that fight gets canceled, you're in a great spot if you don't have any of them and your opponents do.
It doesn't mean that your strategy didn't work. I mean, sometimes weird things happen. I mean, it seems like every day around Southwest Florida, somebody drives off the deep end and ends up in a car accident or something. I mean, weird things happen.
It's a super physically demanding sport, right? Like, not just the fight. Like, that's what people don't understand. The amount of strain and stress on your body just to make weight is more than most people have gone through physically in any context. So stuff's gonna happen. Donald Cerrone's gonna eat bad hamburgers 2 fights in a row or whatever. Like, these things happen. There's not a ton we can do. We all saw the alternative, which was the late swap that went horrible. So I think it just, you're gonna lose some. Any DFS sport you play, your quarterback might sprain his ankle in the first quarter. You might bet a player prop over on a shooting guard who gets hurt in the first half. Like, it's just part of sports. we just notice it so much more because it's an individual sport, so the whole thing gets scrapped. Versus, again, Jalen Hurts gets hurt in the first quarter. It's not like they cancel the football game. That's the only difference, but build around it. If you think everyone's going to be playing the main event fighters and there's a chance like Jon Jones doesn't show up for whatever reason because he's Jon Jones, fade that fight. Like, you'll make a ton of money by doing that if you're right. So there's ways to plan for it on our end. And I just don't think, complaining about it is really worthwhile. Obviously, for you and I, like the two sickos that play cash games every week because nobody else does this, it sucks because the correct strategy is to play both main event fighters when there's only one 5-round fight. Like, it's not even a solid strategy. It's just outright correct. This is what we should be doing. Every once in a while, we're going to get burned. But there are some lineups that cashed even with both main event fighters because so many people do that. So, it sucks. I don't like it, but don't bet what you can't lose.
Or we find out 5 minutes before a Chargers game that Justin Herbert's playing because literally Tyrod Taylor can't play.
Yeah, I mean, the long sordid history of the San Diego / Los Angeles Chargers medical staff is a whole different issue because those guys are. But that was cool. I remember I think I had some Tyrod in DFS that week and found out just in time to make some swaps. So I get it. It's unfortunate. From a DraftKings standpoint, I almost think we should lock the whole prelim cards at the start of the prelim and then lock the main events or the main card at the start of 10 p.m. or whenever it goes off. Just because that is a set time, they could do that. It's kind of a good compromise. That wouldn't help us last week anyway, though. So I don't know how much good that would even do.
Like that football when you have a 1 p.m. and then a 4
Exactly.
p.m. lock.
Yeah, that's why I said that because it's a similar method. But they announced that fight was off 2 minutes after the main card officially launched. So it wouldn't have saved us anyway. Are there weeks it would have? Maybe. I'd rather, with how poorly DraftKings executed it when they tried it, they just don't, right? It was so bad. Guys were swapping onto fighters whose fights had already happened. They were locking fighters who were 2 fights away that you wanted to swap to. It just wasn't worth it. It was just such a headache. Although I will say DraftKings went back and credited me $100 for a $50 double up that I finished 31st in when 30th was the cash line because they DQ'd somebody ahead of me for swapping onto a fight that had already happened. And it was 3 weeks later they gave me the money. So that was a nice little bonus.
All right, so now back to this week's card. So there's one guy I'm really looking forward to seeing, and I know you all too, because
You and everybody else.
Because Bo Nickal, if you remember his Penn State wrestling days, is a really good wrestler.
And more importantly, he's a really good athlete. He starts some people on the feet too. Here's the thing: don't lay minus 2,000 on Bo Nickal or whatever.
I'm not in a legal betting state. I'm not even thinking about it.
Yeah, I don't necessarily mean you. If you're listening to this, seriously, don't do that. At those odds, it's 95% win rate. You need to make profit. Is there a greater than a 5% chance he slips on the Prime hydration logo in the cage and twists an ankle or comes in with a knee injury we don't know about? Seriously, don't lay minus 2,000 on an MMA fight ever. So much weird stuff can happen. With that said, he's a very intriguing DFS play because there's other heavy favorites. He's $400 more than Shavkat Rakhmonov. He's $200 more than Shevchenko. He's $300 more than Ian Gary. Ian Gary's the one I'm not as interested in from a price considered standpoint. I don't think he's as likely to pick up a bunch of takedowns or get a quick finish. Bo at 9,600, he almost needs to win this in the first minute to pay off from a DFS standpoint. But man, did they make this fight just so Bo Nickal could look good. The UFC is not in the Jamie Pickett business. He's not an up-and-coming guy. This is not a test for Bo Nickal. This is, hey, everyone, let's see how good Bo Nickal is. Now you get to watch it. With that said, man, I think Shavkat's kind of in the same boat. I don't think they really think Jeff Neal is a considerable challenge to him. Shavkat's minus 500, minus 600 range, which feels like a huge difference versus Nickal's line. But if you look at the implied odds, it's really only 10-ish%. You're getting him 400 cheaper. Jeff Neal might be able to get back up from a couple takedowns, which gives Shavkat more scoring opportunities than Nickal's going to have. Even, I'm actually kind of getting dragged on Twitter for this right now, if anyone follows me. Cameron Saman, 8,800. They bring him in to win this too. He's only 8,800. He's fighting Manny Martinez. Manny Martinez is 2-1, but both of his UFC wins are split decisions. Both could have gone the other way. So I think there's certainly paths to not playing Bo Nickal in DFS tournaments and having it work out, just because with how much more he costs than these other guys, he's going to need a huge score. Almost has to be first minute. Where, if Simon or Shavkat, if they kind of beat up a guy for 4.5 minutes and finish him at the end of the first round, that might be a bigger score, or even just a close score, which then makes Nickal not in the optimal.
Is it also, I mean, let's say Bo gets, how many takedowns would he have to get in one round? Would he have to get like multiple takedowns?
I mean, you basically, with these super high price guys, you want them to win in the first minute because of that quick win bonus, or at like the 4:58 mark, right? Because that way they've got all those times. The problem is he's not going to get more than one takedown per round because Jamie Pickett is not going to get back up with Bo Nickal on top of him. He's just not. Like, this isn't a thing that's going to happen, right? And I hate saying things definitively like that because someone's going to come back and, oh, we got 2 takedowns. You know what I'm saying? There's a very good odds that once this one hits the ground, it doesn't come back up. So I'm not even thinking about how many takedowns. The answer is 1. He's going to get 1 for every round. And control time is really not worth that much from DFS. Is it going to take a lot of shots to finish Jamie Pickett on the ground from Bo Nickal? Probably not. But does Bo Nickal come in there and dance around and show off his stand-up a little bit before getting the takedown, finish him at 130 to 230 in the first round? That'd still be a very good score, great for cash games if you can find the salary. I just have a hard time seeing a path towards him being in the optimal lineup unless either the other expensive fighters all fail or he finishes them in the first minute. Kind of in play that he finishes them in the first minute. It wouldn't shock me, but it's tough to build lineups when you got one guy at 9,600, assuming you're also playing Shevchenko as well. That makes it tough.
Yeah, that's why I love double championship codes, because now calculations are out the window.
Yeah. And this is a general strategy thing, so don't think too much about this card. Heavier weight fighters don't get back up when they get taken down. Like, when you see flyweight takedowns, right? They're down for 12 seconds, they pop back up, there's another takedown. Even, lightweights, we've got Mateusz Gamrot on the card. When he fought Arman Tsarukyan, you could have scored somewhere between like 2 and 80 takedowns in that fight, depending on how quick you were on counting it as a takedown versus a scramble. That's the kind of thing we need for DFS. We need a takedown, the guy gets back up, you take him down again over and over. Nobody's getting up when Bo Nickal takes him down. Not nobody. Nobody he's going to fight in the next couple of fights is getting back up, which kind of just limits his ceiling in terms of the takedown. Sometimes I think it was like Ronnie Lawrence a couple years ago landed like 12 takedowns in a fight. He won a decision and still scored like 150 points. You're not going to see that out of Bo Nickal because the other guy would have to get him off him, and they ain't gonna.
Yeah, I mean, if the UFC, if Bo Nickal won in a cakewalk in his UFC pay-per-view debut, they gave him one.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the thing people miss. Like, this might be a controversial take here, but I think Cameron Saman, similar boat. They're giving him Manny Martinez. They're not in the Manny Martinez business. They're in the 22-year-old undefeated South African business. Shavkat Rakhmonov. Jeff Neal's a tough guy, but come on. Like, we saw what Shavkat did to Neil Magny last year. Just made him look like a child. Those might be better DFS plays. One, when you consider the salary. And 2, Shavkat might have to take Jeff Neal down a few times. He's kind of my favorite in terms of ceiling, just because Jeff Neal should put up just enough of a fight to open up that ceiling a little bit more.
Just don't have an end 5 seconds into the second round.
Honestly, even, I mentioned Gamrot, he's fighting Jalen Turner. Turner is dangerous off his back, a good grappler, not great takedown defense. That could be a fight where Gamrot takes him down, Turner wiggles off the cage, gets back up. Gamrot does it again. Like, there's a massive ceiling on that one. Although that one, you don't have the safety of, like, massive favorite. This guy's almost definitely going to win. So you're trading that a little bit, but I think Gamrot should handle Turner fairly easily, which makes him a great DFS play.
Might be a better GPP play because everybody's going to play Bo Nickal.
I don't know. Yeah, you're probably right, just on name recognition and all that. I want to say that not everyone's going to play Bo Nickal just because he's so expensive and it's tough to fit him, but you're probably right. So we'll have to do another private Zoom call before I make my ownership projections because I'm going to be in my own head too much this week.
I'm gonna be calculating like.
I mean, you're the cash game guy. You don't give a crap about ownership projections. They don't matter.
Yeah, I'll play the guy who's 92% in cash and watch him get 70.
But then it doesn't matter, right? Everybody else gets 72.
Not if my guy costs 9,200 and your guy costs 96.
Oh yeah. No, I mean it's tough, and I like in a perfect world would I play Bo Nickal in all my lineups? Sure. Like I'm big into the UFC Rainmakers. I bought a bunch of him like 2 months ago. He's the captain in all my lineups over there because you don't have a salary cap. But does that mean he's necessarily going to get the best score when you factor in salary? No, just because how scoring works. Can I go on a mini rant about DraftKings scoring here?
Yes.
All right, cool. So they fixed it a little bit by doing that quick win bonus because it sucked when your guy wins in 10 seconds and doesn't score that many points, right? So they made it a little bit better. Now you win in the first minute, they get, is it 25 extra for the first minute, I think? Which definitely helps, right? So you don't get penalized for having a guy be too good. But what they really should do, instead of it being by round or whatever, it should just be however many seconds are left in the fight, you get some multiple of that for a finish. So if you finish early in the first round, that's worth more than late in the first round. Finish early in the second is worth more than late in the second. We can debate how that works for a 5-round fight versus a 3-round fight. I'm not really that worried about it. But finishing a guy, who was Michael Chandler when he front kicked Tony Ferguson, that shouldn't be like 20 points less than if he had done it 4 seconds earlier in the fight. Like that should be 1 point less or something. So that is one way they should fix that. Anyone wants to email your DraftKings representative and propose my theory, just give me credit for it. We'll call it the word scoring. Just saying.
Now we're talking how the fixed DK scores today. You're guaranteed to win every week, right?
Well, no, but I'm just so if Bo Nickal finishes this in 61 seconds versus 59, should that really be worth 25 points less because it took him 2 seconds longer? What if the ref was just a little slow on getting his hand in there when he landed the knockout punch with 58 seconds, but it took Herb Dean 2 seconds to get there? Like, there shouldn't be this arbitrary line,
What if Herb Dean let the fighter go 2 seconds more before he shut down?
Right. Or Bruce Buffer just reads the wrong time, It's all possible. It should be incrementally less points every second. It shouldn't be just a big cliff right at that mystical 1 minute mark, 5 minute, 10 minute.
Should be like draining sand. It should be like draining sand, right?
Right. Yeah. You start with however many finish points and they slowly trickle away. All right. Anyone else on the card you want to talk about, get to? Because there's a ton here.
I mean, it's going to be. I mean, you're telling me we've got Jon Jones, Shevchenko, Bo Nickal, all these guys. I mean, this is a crazy card, and I think one where whether you're playing GPPs for that what is it, the $700,000 tournament, or you're playing cash games like us, everybody's going to have fun this weekend.
Yeah, real quick, I'm going to rapid fire through some of these thoughts on the card. Jalen Turner versus Mateusz Gamrot. Someone's going to score a ton of points. I'm not super confident it's going to be Gamrot, but you're going to want that fight. Ian Gary's probably too expensive here. He's not really a finisher. It's a little bit tougher of a fight than I think the betting lines would indicate because he's like minus 700, which is a bit much. I think Saman's a steal at 8,800. Dricus Du Plessis, if he wins, he's about minus 250 in there, 8,600. Going to be by knockout if he wins against Blonde Brunson. That's a good one. I like Trevin Jones on the cheap end just because he's fighting Cody Garbrandt, who famously has some issues with his chin, and Trevin Jones got a little bit of pop. Not playing him in cash, but from a GPP standpoint, cheap cash guys or cash plays. Jessica Penne is probably going to be a 15-minute fight against Ricci. That's not a terrible one. Grasso, who we mentioned earlier. Man, it's kind of tough on the cheaper end here. Araujo against Ribas. I think Ribas should probably be a bigger favorite than this one, so I'm not touching Araujo at 7,900. Anyone else? Any thoughts you have, Dylan? We can bounce off each other for the last few minutes here.
I mean, I think the big question this weekend is 3 championship fighters or 4 championship fighters.
Yeah, that's always the question. And, Jones and Gane are so close in salary that, like, just play them both. What are you doing here, right? it'll be interesting to see when all the like inside the distance lines come out, because that might change the calculus here a little bit. It's hard though. Like if you play Jones, Gane, and Shevchenko, salary gets real tight. But if you play Grasso, then you're guaranteed 2 losses in your lineup. The heavyweight fight, the loser might not have a good score. So it's tricky. You know, if you feel confident enough to pick a side in the heavyweight fight and then go just Shevchenko, could open up some salary, but that would take some guts that I don't know if I'm willing to do for this one.
Yeah, especially because both fighters are known for going the distance. Because I think Gane's gone like 25.
I mean, he's got some stoppages too. It'll be interesting, and you know, bigger, heavier.
Gone 25 minutes a couple times.
Yeah, I mean,
3
more than
times.
from a heavyweight, generally speaking. But if that's, you know, usually the way I do the analysis with that is if there's one fight that's very likely to end inside the distance, I'm not going to play both fighters from that because the loser probably has a bad score. I think both of these are probably going to have reasonably close finish odds, but one of them, those close finish odds heavily imply that Shevchenko is going to win, where the other one, it's like, we don't know who's going to win, but it's probably going to end early. So those make it trickier.
All right, Billy.
Yeah, I've made that. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say I've made that read correctly in the past with picking the fight that gets finished versus the one that doesn't, and still been burned for it because the one that gets finished, the loser, Glover Teixeira, scores 1,000,000 points even though he gets finished. So that doesn't guarantee success. It's just one thing to look at.
All right, Billy. So thanks for hopping on today. Hopefully this week is very profitable, and this is going to start a whirlwind of UFC pay-per-views. I think we've got like 3 in the next 5-6 weeks.
Yeah, which I'm not gonna go on my other mini rant here, but stop it. That's too much. No one wants to spend that much money.